trained sports to have to clear the room. Stand up and walk now.
Hello, and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I'm the editor at TheRinger.com. And joining me in the studio, The Watch's own Chucky Lozano. It's Andy Greenwald.
You just turned it on for the cameras. I love it.
Well, I see. You know what this is about? It's about conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell Scott Pruitt that, but it's all about conservation.
He
for
would
me.
be interested.
And so when I'm with you personally, I'm going to give you like 18%. Maybe 36%. And then when I get in front of the cameras
and the mics,
it's go time.
You are a red light player. You are amazing.
Andy, it's Monday. It's the end of a long weekend of sport for me. But we're going to talk a little bit about Succession later. We're also going to talk a little bit about this Carter's record, but
event albums in general.
Yeah, but I want to talk a little bit about the last few weeks of Wyoming records, as you described them, versus some of our past experiences with hot summers of rap and pop music. We were going to maybe talk about Westworld, but I think we might punt that to Thursday because
we could keep punting. We could just punt that right out of the
stadium. Are you keeping up with what do you read Twitter about it?
Yes. I was very intrigued by the episode that was supposed to be really good.
The last week's one, the Ghost Nation one.
So intrigued.
Yeah.
I almost watched it. And then I was going to watch last night, and then I basically texted you and I said, "Do I have to do this?"
I think I said, "Are you going to do this or not?" And you said, "Would rather not."
So,
and here we are.
Just a nice night on the couch.
But that's okay because I think that the people, I want to, rather than say like reasons why maybe we don't like something, I think the people come to us for why we do like stuff.
Sure. So are we going to talk about Mexico's 1-0 victory?
Let's do it. So Succession a little bit later, but first, this has been a fun weekend for me because I don't know if you've ever read any books by this guy named Dan Jenkins.
I don't think so.
Very crotchety old sports writer now, but wrote North Dallas 40 and was sort of one of the great Sports Illustrated, sports magazine columnists. And he has a book that came out, I think in the late 80s, but it might have been in the early 90s, called You Gotta Play Hurt. And it's about a guy who just basically his not doppelganger. What is it when you have like your stand-in, your author stand-in?
Your avatar.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it's basically about a year in the life of this sports columnist, but he is living high off the land. Even though in the book there's a lot of like budget cuts at the magazine, it doesn't stop him from basically living at the Four Seasons all over the globe, doing a year in sports. So he goes to like Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and then he goes to like the Olympics.
This book sounds great.
And he goes to, like the Rose Bowl, then he goes to the World Series. It's a great, great book. It probably is a little bit retrograde in its attitudes towards women.
And towards expense accounts.
And
apparently.
Expense accounts. I haven't read it in a very long time, but it's always stuck with me. And the reason why I bring it up is because this weekend was a real You Gotta Play Hurt weekend. Because it was like the World Cup and the U.S. Open we're all gathering. I mean, obviously I'm a huge soccer fan, but it just was like everybody was sort of gathering around the tube to check out these, not one-off events, but these special events in sports. So it was kind of very enjoyable this weekend with especially Mexico. The Mexico match was amazing. But also even some of the stuff that happened Saturday at the U.S. Open, because I don't know if you know, but Phil Mickelson made a fool of himself.
I heard that.
Yeah. Which is, I don't think I do it all the time where I stop my ball, but then I'm like, that's a 10.
So what happened was this is one of the most established golfers in the world.
Probably a top 15 all-time golfer.
And he took a shot and then just gave it a little extra.
So the greens were very dry, baked greens.
That sounds like
and
marijuana
so
talk. What
basically you couldn't stop the ball. Like if you hit it and it got on a down slope, it just like rolled all the way because the greens were essentially like pavement.
Okay.
There was no grip to the greens. Wow. And Phil was out there. He was playing very poorly. He was playing with a man named Beef. The other guy's name is Beef Johnson.
That's for real, his name?
Yeah, it's his nickname, but everybody calls him Beef. And Phil was just completely like crashing and burning.
Yeah.
And he putted the ball, and it went past the hole, and you could see that it was going to roll down the hill all the way back, and he was going to have to chip it back up, and then that might go too far. So instead of going through all that, he just ran over to the ball and hit it back up the hill.
Oh.
and was assessed a 2-stroke penalty. And for a while, everybody was like, "Oh, we're going to disqualify him from the tournament," but he didn't. And he was not exactly. He was a little bit like, "If you didn't like that, I'm sorry, but also toughen up."
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
That's kind of like me on Twitter these days.
How so?
I've definitely sometimes like loaded up the tweet cannon with some real thoughts about our country's situation and behavior at the border.
Uh-huh.
Then I stop it before it rolls downhill. You know what I mean? Like I know nothing about golf and nor do I care about it, but I kind of respect a dude who just sees the future.
Yeah.
And sees what's coming and is like, nope.
He was like, "I'm going to be out here for another 11 minutes chipping up and down
Yeah.
on this green that's basically about as hard as like a blacktop."
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
Beef is just rolling on.
Laughing.
You never
Beef
wanna-
was just like, "I can't believe this is happening."
I can relate to this on an emotional level. I have to
It was.
say, I'm
It was.
surprised
That's the
by
thing
that.
I like about golf is that it is the human condition on display times 1,000. It's like everything that you are comes out. If you're competitive, if you're just there for like the giggles, like if you're trying to be better, if you don't like pressure situations, if you do like pressure situations. And the guy who won is this dude named Brooks Koepka, who's essentially like golf is corny.
Oh,
Like golf is for losers.
so he's my avatar.
No, he's like 6'5". He has veneers and he looks like he could bench press both of us with one arm. And like the only reason why he hasn't won like multiple majors is because he like tore the tendon off his wrist, probably from curling.
Is this is not Beef?
No, this is Brooks.
Okay.
And he won, but his whole vibe is kind of like, this is for suckers. Like I'd much rather be playing baseball.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm into sport envy. Like if you think you're playing the wrong sport.
Yes, me too. I love that.
That's
I
fascinating.
love that.
It's interesting to talk about this stuff for me also because we have long history in this podcast of having a very complicated relationship or just a committed relationship to shared spectacle. We want to watch things with people and we want to share these things with people and we want, we miss constantly like the two old cranks that we've become the time when we were all watching the same shows together.
Sure, I definitely want to be watching England instead of making this podcast right now.
Well, we have an alert system. I believe members.
Snowden is gonna do a series of English-friendly signals if England
members
scores.
of the social staff, just in the same room as us,
Yeah.
will wear their beef heater caps. No, they're not caps; they're large. Anyway, but if we could pivot just for a moment to the music stuff, because
Sure.
I think that's where it's most relevant. Because it seems like we have been doing this podcast for as long as there have been these event albums and surprise albums and.
That's a good point. Have we?
More, I mean, we have been podcasting through the advent of this era.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to watch it unfold this year, particularly with Kanye's Wyoming records and now this total surprise release of the Carters this weekend. Because I am now completely split, where I get it. I understand why it is important from a marketing and disruption, which I hate even saying, perspective,
Sure.
to unveil your records like this. Music is not central to the cultural conversation in the way that it once was. Certainly the album release is not central the way it once was. You have to grab hold of the zeitgeist with whatever you possibly can and try to basically wrestle Twitter and everything else into submission to pay attention to you.
Yes.
I get that,
And they
you know?
face a similar problem that we talked about with Donald Glover last week or 2 weeks ago, where they are not only competing with the other new releases, but they were competing with every piece of music ever released because of the way we can listen to music now.
We can change our minds in midstream and listen to the song that
Quite
we'd rather
literally,
be
yeah.
listening to, or the song that inspired the song that we're listening to. So I get all that, but I think that so far, and obviously some of these records are very new, but they are asking to be judged entire. I mean, they are being almost constructed for the cycle of instant think piece, instant charticle that we live in. And I really do think the spectacle has wildly outstripped the content, and I don't even know if that matters this time around, this year. We can go through these records because we've skipped talking about a bunch of them, and I think that's kind of telling in and of itself. But the Carters record, to me, more than anything else, and I've only listened to it briefly because, listen, shouts to Doug, I'm not going through this title drama again.
Yeah.
I am not. So that means everybody knows what that means. That means I've had some...
By all accounts, Doug pushed the right button.
He
this
did.
time. Yeah.
But this... Everybody understands that what I'm saying here is based on a couple YouTube spins over the weekend and some just deep Spotify diving in the 2.5 hours that I've been awake before having to do everything I had to do today. really just seems like it is a marketing statement. It is a fascinating cultural document. And honestly, I felt this way kind of about Lemonade too. Like I think that what they are expressing here about their marriage is, of artistic value, considering that they've made this trilogy about the state of their union. I think they're mining what they have. I think they're doing some forward-thinking stuff with the choreography, with the imagery, by taking over the Louvre. But I don't really care about their bank statements. I'm happy they're happy.
Sure.
There is something I'm finding this. Maybe this is a similar argument that one could make about a TV show, which is that you put the conflict in, and that makes a good show. But the show about how everyone's doing fine, I mean, it's Jim and Pam in the last 3 seasons of The Office. It's like, we're glad they're fine, but you don't need to make a TV show about them anymore.
I think I've resisted commenting on some of these records because I've probably arrived at the point in my life where I understand fully that my opinion about these records has no bearing on them.
Fair.
And I think whether that was hubris or not, 10 years ago, just felt like much more like I have a certain set of criteria that these records need to meet, and you are deviating from this, and hence you failed, or you've satisfied this, and hence you succeeded. So I think that now I'm a little bit more like, this is what happens to people as they get older. It's like pop music, with rare exception, you just realize that pop music is targeted towards a completely younger demographic than you are.
Well, Jay Stylus is doing good work here. I thought Lindsay Zolad's piece that came on The Ringer today was great, just reframing the relationship as Beyonce as the alpha in the relationship, and what it says about her musically on the record, how she's doing basically, she's behaving on the record like a rapper, and Jay-Z's behaving like an R&B singer because he's doing the emotional lifting on it while she's just stunting. That's all fine. That's good. But musically, I'm. If you divorce it from the spectacle, if you don't watch the video, I don't know what's there. I mean, but now they have new songs to play on their concert that they're doing.
Sure,
So that's the purpose of it.
Right.
The Wyoming stuff we got to run through for a minute.
AKA the Kanye records.
The Kanye records. One of the reasons we've avoided this, I'll say one of the reasons I've avoided this, is because the Kanye record is ass.
Right.
It's terrible. It's embarrassing, I think, and it's almost nice that people have propped it up and tried to pretend that one could actually bleed if you put your hand on a stove, but you can't. Mm-hmm. It would be pretty tricky to do it. And the whole run has been mostly frustrating because it was, again, he set this deadline for himself and then threw stuff out there. Now,
well, by all accounts, also had a record done that he then scrapped and redid in 2 weeks,
yes.
right? Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. The Daytona, I think, is the album or co-album of the year. I think it's incredible, and
the other one being Father John.
You're so cruel about that. No, our homie's rolling blackouts,
that
man.
Father John record is the shit.
Really though?
Yeah.
Come on now. Come on. The Pusha record is the best one because it's the most considered, right? It's unfair almost that it came first because it feels like it was actually worked on and considered as a statement. Kids See Ghost record, I like a lot. I like a lot because the title track, Kanye and Cudi are basically doing the Massive Attack flow. Yeah. Like Karma Coma style.
Sure.
Which, that is a very small group of people who have been waiting to hear that. But
what did you think of the Nas record?
Sorry, I just fell asleep. What? The Nas record is a missed opportunity, I feel like. I think the Slick Rick samples track is good, but what did you think of it? I mean, I just feel like, again, if you told me it's the spectacle versus the substance here, and I'm not mad at spectacle. We live in a spectacle world right now, and having a Nas listening party for a 7-track record produced by Kanye under the Brooklyn Bridge like they did last week, and everyone's, tweeting, putting their phones up, being like, this is classic Nas. This is back to that Illmatic shit. Like, we're finally getting him. We're finally getting the bars over the beats that we've been promised. And then, sometime Saturday afternoon, it sort of dribbles onto Spotify.
Right.
And you're like, ugh, what is that? What is it?
Well, this goes back to the event. This goes back to this idea of us all gathered around some sort of, bright and shining object and freaking out about it. One of the probably defining cultural moments and there's been a few, but in our friendship, the one that we always go back to and talk about and reference, and it was probably...
Was it the time we drove to Camden to buy a copy of Wu-Tang Forever?
That was pretty good.
That was a good day.
That was pretty good. And you want to talk about people standing under the Brooklyn Bridge with their phones out. That was definitely the late 90s version of that.
That was some real,
early aughts version of that.
Yeah.
But it was Good Fridays, which was this, what was that, the summer of 07?
No. Good Fridays was leading up to Fantasy, which came out in 10.
Okay, so it's the summer of 10, and it was, a series of releases singles that would drop on Fridays on the internet. And when I say the internet, I do mean like there would be an initial drop, and then you would find like a Z-Share link that had CDQ, it was CD quality.
There was a little like QuickTime box on KanyeWest.com. On Friday afternoons.
Yeah, and so it felt like it was building up to something. Mm-hmm. It actually felt like there was being groundwork laid to get somewhere, and what that somewhere was Twisted Fantasy, which remains my favorite Kanye record. But that felt like an actual plan and an actual experience, rather than this is one of 67 things that I'm doing, and I'm just gonna kind of give you the sensation of a Kanye West record, and even some of the quote unquote best parts on Ye and the best parts on Ghost and the best parts on Nas are these coming attractions for things that never happen. There'll be like a 5-second thing where you're like, oh my God, here, this is what's about to happen. And then it doesn't, you know what I mean? And then whether it's lyrically kind of facile, or it's just sort of empty in terms of its ideas, or it feels like it's a sketch rather than a finished painting. And I'm all for like a punkish DIY rendering of a person's creative process. But this just feels way more about the wristbands you have to get to the listening session, rather than what they're playing at the listening session.
Now, another question that I have to ask is this also, we're talking specifically about records that people who listen to the show could take or leave, probably. Maybe some people are into it, some people aren't. But we could plug TV shows into the same conversation.
Yes.
And I think a bigger question that I know neither of us really wants to talk about, but it's also sort of, it's influencing all of our cultural appreciation at the moment, is the state of the world. And do these things just feel, is it that someone like Kanye, who a few years ago mastered the narrative and storytelling of all of it? Because the thing about Good Fridays leading into Fantasy, as you said, it was that we were hearing for months that who's getting invited to Hawaii? Oh, Pete Rock is there, and RZA is there.
There's a What Would Mobb Deep Do?
What Would Mobb Deep Do written
picture,
over the console. And then we started to get drips and drabs of it, and we just hear, oh, these people really were in the same room, and that's, that's incredible to imagine what that could possibly be like. And we were along for the ride, Did he lose the plot? Because clearly he did in some ways in his own personal life, and maybe even with his mental health. But he's our age, so has he lost the ability to marshal that kind of compelling long form storytelling, because he's too old to understand how the delivery systems work these days? Or is all of this just basically back burner, where it's like, I mean, Lindsay Zolad's expressed this really well in her piece about the Carters, which is saying the thing that she found most hopeful about the Everything Is Love album is that the whole album is about how they are wealthy enough to make a dynasty, that their children are safe now. They have made a better world. And she's saying something I agree with. If you can think that there's a better world around the corner, then this is music I want to listen to right now, because it doesn't feel like it. But a lot of these things feel deeply divorced from the larger concerns. And so, as someone who's been a fan of Kanye West for as long as he's been making music, I do actually still care about him and his mental health and his creative process as a person. I'm engaged with him in his music making, but the level of projected narcissism that's coming at us, and a record about how, like, I just need to hurt myself to feel things. People are getting hurt right now, in the world, and I'm having trouble engaging with it. And frankly, that's another reason why I actually thought going into this season of Westworld that I would be able to dip in and out.
Because you wanted the escape.
Yeah, or I was like, I'm curious about the storytelling they're doing, or maybe, but the idea of frittering away time in a maze just doesn't feel productive to me. It doesn't feel distracting. It feels indulgent and kind of aggravating. Now, the aggravation part of all this, that feels like the responding to the frequency that the world is vibrating on right now.
I don't
remember.
It's not
being
Kanye's
so
job
annoyed.
to be George Bush doesn't care about black people guy forever.
Sure.
And it's not the Carters' job to not do the things that they want to do artistically and aesthetically because they happen to come out on a weekend where it felt like the world was falling apart. Because frankly, if you look at Twitter long enough, it always feels like the world is falling apart, and it's important. I feel like it's tough to be selective about the things that are out of step with that.
I agree with
because
this.
like I just opened up this podcast talking about golf. You know what I mean? Like, so
We all need our escapes.
And but I take that to heart. You know what I mean? Where it's like, if you want to be real about some of the things that are happening in this world, we should probably all stop what we're doing and dedicate our lives to making a more just existence for everybody, instead of
I agree.
building up this stuff where it's like, hey, this is an okay distraction, but this is like a garish distraction. And it's like, I'm gonna go see Day of the Soldado. That's probably like counterproductive for the world that we live in right now. It's a really complicated conversation. I thought about that a lot this weekend, because I think what happens is that if you open yourself up to the stream of information, it's very difficult to modulate your emotional state, you know? And I think that was Kanye's last couple of months have been a real, like, this is the darkest timeline of that. You know what I mean? This is a guy who has thrown himself into the 24-hour, 7 days a week, everything is on you celebrity moment, and really like gotten tripped up in there a lot. And I whether or not that's because his concept of self is so shattered by living in this celebrity microscope or not, I can't really speculate. But I do find it to be, these records are, and specifically Ye is kind of in a weird way emblematic of right now. It's distracted. It's not particularly well thought out.
It's self-indulgent.
It's pained, but it's also like the pain doesn't have a direction, you know? It kind of feels like here's I think this is pain, so I'm just going to say it like this. Like, I don't know. It's almost difficult to listen to, frankly. I don't think I'll be revisiting it anytime soon, nor will I really ever, if times are ever better, going to go back to it as an escape from anything else.
I think that's very well said, and I think you actually turned my head around, because I think that one of the things that I'm responding to is the fact that the Wyoming records, and particularly the Carters, are successfully pitched at the frequency of the times, in that the Carters record is not designed to just be a record you listen to. It is designed to have been dropped, to be gifted from on high to us.
It's an experience. It's a celebration.
Yes.
It's a complete and total, almost like assassin-like execution of image and sound. You know what I mean? Like, I think that they knew exactly what they were doing. And I think that there is also a degree to which they don't really give a shit if you like it or not, because if they did, they wouldn't have put it up Saturday afternoon on a music service that not that many people use. Yeah,
it's true. It's true. And you mentioned a moment ago what Donald Glover said to us about competing with all media at the same time.
Yes.
The other thing about it the other thing that he reinforced when we spoke to him that I really appreciated was how important it was to him that no one knew what Teddy Perkins was before it aired, and no one knew what it was after it aired.
That they still don't really get into it, yeah.
And I think it's a really canny understanding of people's sensibilities and people's brains at this moment to actually give them something that people no longer think that they want, which is some element of privacy and mystery.
Sure.
And let it be.
There's code.
And I think that
you can try to decode it, but it's a lot of the imagery and a lot of the things they're doing. They're saying like, here, this was all precise and this was all thought and pre-planned, but you have to do the work to figure it out.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that I have trouble articulating about my difficulty with Westworld is that it seems to be designed by people who are very much in on the larger machine, which is not to say that Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy are actually posting stuff on Reddit or that they're pitching it to Reddit. They're making the show that motivates them to make the show. They're following their own muse. But it does feel pitched at a frequency that is designed to excite 5 minutes later, here's what I think it is.
Sure.
I solved it. And I think that I'm bumping up against that at this particular moment. And I know we'll take a break, but this larger conversation is definitely an interesting way to look at Succession, which is a show that we're both interested in, that we are both watching on Sunday nights, and feels, to me anyway, sort of like cordoned off from so much of this, and I can't tell if that's in the case of Succession. I can't tell if it's a plus or a minus, and I'm eager to have you talk me through it.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor and get into Succession. All right, Andy, we are back. I think Succession's the best thing on television right now, but that's sort of an intercontinental belt right now. Okay. It's not a real, world championship belt. We're kind of in an in-between time. I keep saying that. I keep saying that we're in an in-between time, and I don't know if we're ever going to be back in
what's on the other side,
quote-unquote high season. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're waiting for – I don't know what we're waiting for.
I'm waiting for Glow Season 2 next week.
Okay.
I don't know if that's going to shift the paradigms.
That comes back next week?
Yeah, man.
Wow.
Yeah, they keep it moving.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely be getting to that, but I think that Succession is, in a lot of ways, my Daytona on television.
Okay.
The reason why I like Daytona in music is because it just feels incredibly precise. Mm-hmm. It's got its walls and it's got its boundaries, and it works within those walls and boundaries and creates the best possible space it can given the self-imposed formal limitations it puts on it. Succession is just a TV show. I think a lot of people want TV shows to be a lot of different things right now, but everything from the cutaways to a foggy New York skyline to the recurring motifs in the music to the caliber and the pitch of all the performances, which I think in the pilot episode are all over the map, but then have increasingly gotten more and more on point. And the formal innovation that I think Succession makes, aside from the fact that it's unclear as to whether or not it thinks it's a comedy or a drama, which I find kind of fascinating,
I respect that,
is it has completely sidestepped a conversation that I think has dominated television for a few too many years now, which is, are these people likable or not? It's besides the point. It is beside the point. It is beside the point as to whether or not you would want to get a beer with Kendall or Roman or Logan or whoever these people, or whether or not, and the characters in the show itself, whereas I feel like it's been a trope of so many, especially the trailers for shows, because they must have some market research that says people need to have this addressed, is, are we bad people that did a bad thing?
Right.
I'm not a bad man. I'm a bad man, and you shouldn't be with me. I'm a good man. You should. It's none of that shit. These people are all barnacles. Like, they are all awful, awful people, but they are somehow interesting. And I think interesting is still a valuable thing. And I don't think that if you find them interesting, it is somehow a referendum on what you value in the world.
Sure.
So if you find like Roman masturbating into the New York skyline from a 44th floor window or something,
if you find that relatable,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be relatable. I think it's just like watching these people who are supposed to be the princes and princesses of a city and this is the same as it ever was. It's the same as I'm not comparing to Shakespeare, but these are Henry IV part twos of like these fucking rich assholes who have always had this money and are now confronted with the limitations of their own intelligence or the limitations of their own position in the world, and are scratching to make sure that they can continue their lifeline to the kind of power and money they wanted. And it's actually really funny, and I think the performances are excellent. I think I'm really keyed in on Jeremy Strong. I haven't really seen a character like Kendall before, who is at once like one person when he walks into a meeting room and another person when he's like in private, and is obviously like they're not laying it on too thick with the demons thing. In the third episode, he is confronted with that a little bit, but doesn't have a moment of crisis. I'm sure it is, but I don't know. I find a lot to like about this show, and I think that the third episode, and honestly, not to spoil anything, but the next week's episode are the strongest bits of television that I've seen in a while.
I love your enthusiasm for the show, and I find myself agreeing with almost everything you're saying, except there's one place I just can't quite get to, which is I still don't think I care. And caring is a very difficult thing to parse with television. And again, I come back to this idea of like how we're choosing to invest our time, to spend our time, the intimacy of our relationship to these shows, and then particularly the intimacy that we choose to invest in shows when episodes are 56 minutes and there are many other things we could be doing with our time.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the show, and I admire the show. I think it's operating on a very high level very early, which is extremely impressive. I think a lot of that has to do with the casting and the performance. I think you're totally right. I think that has a correct point of view, as you said, which is that it can't quite tell if it's satire or if it's tragedy or drama, but on a deep level it understands that they're all the same thing. It does a effortless job of communicating something essential, which is what you said, which is that these people who are the princes or princesses of the city are just rich assholes with daddy issues and aren't necessarily better at, frankly, anything than your average person or television protagonist. They just have the access or the connections. And the Kendall character in particular is the heart and soul of the show, and Jeremy Strong's performance is fascinating. And if people were to ask me if I'm recommending the show, I would recommend the show maybe solely for this performance that he's giving, because we rarely see an actor like him in a lead role like this. An actor in a lead role that is essentially doing a character part, but the camera follows only him. Both the character and the actor seem completely, well, not the character, but the way the character is pitched. So the writers who are writing him understand this, and the actor embraces it, ego-free, because he's a doof half the time, you know. And the ballet that he's dancing on the tightrope of Donald Trump Jr. is so intentional, but artfully done.
The show is rightfully compared to Arrested Development and its setup. But what's interesting is he should be Michael Bluth, but he's playing him as Job in The Streets and George Michael in The Sheets. You know, he's playing him as like this like complete buffoon whenever he walks into a conference room, and he's making like, you know, lifeboats and all this stuff about Volter.
But also his weird hip hop slang that he drops.
But then when he's in private, he's this sort of ineffectual, kind of sensitive guy.
Yeah, and he's a guy who you have what's dooming him is that he actually does seem to have some self-awareness, unlike all the other people around him.
Yeah.
There are also some great supporting performances. I mean, I'm here for Kieran Culkin in just about anything. It's a wonder that it took this long for him to get a regular series role. Maybe it's because he was waiting for a part like this. Is it Sarah Snook is the Australian actress who plays Shiv, who's terrific?
Sure.
And
Matthew McFadden is just talk about like a Dion Waiters award, like a guy off the bench.
Talk about this guy, because I'm watching the show and there's a supporting character, Tom, who's just, again, you watch the pilot and you consider what this part could be. We're introduced to this character as basically a brown-noser. The performance is so good that he's now the character I'm most interested in. Yeah,
and he is coming off of a lovely, lovely performance in Howard's End.
He's British, right?
Yes, and he was in. I think he's in Mr. Darcy in the past in Pride and Prejudice. I know that Amanda thinks really highly of him in that, and I was sort of surprised to see him in this. I thought he was kind of like he was a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, like a lead.
But he does such a good job of. Again, it's like Kendall. It's not easily describable as to whether he's a sycophant and he's trying to marry into this money, or whether he is actually like a really good soldier and is just dedicated and in love with Shiv and wants to be it, and then will be bizarrely cruel to other characters to kind of make himself known as like, you may think I eat shit when it comes from these people, but you're gonna eat my shit.
Yeah, it's all punching down.
Yes.
But
I'm fascinated by him, even though he's a bully.
I'm going to keep watching, but there is this thing that I imagine I'm not the only person who feels this way, that it just, because, again, maybe it's what the baggage I'm bringing into my experience watching the show is making unfair requests of it. The show is responding creatively quite well to the moment, and it has chosen its aperture. It's choosing the story it wants to tell. It's doing so without tipping its hand one way or another, which is everything that I admire in art or in television. I think I'm bringing some baggage every time I sit down, being like, at this moment in time, I don't fucking care about rich assholes. And I'm almost angry that I have to spend time with them and watch them dicker around over their stock price when I want them all to have their heads on pikes, basically, just on an emotional level.
Sure.
What's interesting about it to me is that this show is arriving at a moment when I do think a lot of the people who watch these types of shows are more in the headspace for a Mr. Robot. And, in terms of like a bottom-up show as opposed to a top-down show, it's kind of interesting to me to consider. This is a thought exercise.
You mean bottom-up in terms of economic?
Yeah. Mr. Robot is a show that is ostensibly, it's doing a lot of things. And obviously I'm biased and we're biased about Sam in general, but the thing about the hook of the first season is that they're going to tear down the 1%,
right?
You know, and then it has unforeseen circumstances, certainly. But the 1% that they're going after, at least through 3 seasons of it, are actually masters of the universe. They actually are pulling off this shit on a crazy Machiavellian level,
right?
You know, what if the Roy family was in charge of E-Corp, is what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to do a mashup just because that's a show that's on my mind.
I know what you mean.
But I would be very curious if it would ever even be possible to have a show that had its arms around both halves of the equation, meaning a show that gave time and space to the 99% and the concerns and the potential foibles of that, and then also allowed the masters of the universe they were railing against to be this deeply psychologically scarred and fucked up. But it's actually kind of more, maybe that's just asking for everything. The fact that we have both shows, you put them together, it paints a picture of a world where everybody is screwing up in the box that they've ended up in.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's almost like I kind of need the ballast of the other in my mind to approach this. That said, I just to tie it into the previous conversation, Succession Island feels far away right now from the culture, doesn't it? I mean, is it because...
Oh, like, do you mean, like, are people really into it?
Are people watching the show?
I think people are going to catch up a little bit. This feels like something that people will get into over the first season, and then maybe the second season will be a little
renewed. So this is for people who are on the fence. Like there is going to be more of this.
Yeah, it got renewed, and I think that I think there's a lot of confidence about it by what I hear. But you know, it's often compared to Billions. Billions was another show that needed a season to figure out what it was, and needed to know how long it was going to go before it could start using up its different plot points and pushing people forward. And Billions is now like this huge ensemble that has the confidence to allow different characters to shine brighter than its leads. And so I'd be curious to see how Succession adds people on as the seasons go by.
Just to wrap up, you like the show a lot. You're engaged with it. You're excited about it. Are you at a point right now? Are you considering shows on 2 different levels? Do you consider shows that you love because they are entertaining and they're engaging and you're having fun with them and they're fun to sit down and watch? And do you also have shows that you feel like are grabbing you and all? Is there a difference between a head and heart show for you in 2018, or are they one and the same?
Oh, are there any head and heart, like shows that are both head and heart?
Yeah, and is this an example of it? I guess that's what I'm asking, because from what I gather, a lot of people love Billions, and I definitely am going to go back and revisit it because it sounds fun. Because it seems like Billions has embraced being a heart show. Not that diminishes it. I don't mean that pejoratively, but it's a show that entertains.
I think that by all accounts, the 3rd season is a little bit more of a head and heart show.
Yeah.
I think the 2nd season is definitely an aesthetic kind of, you know, jacuzzi, because you're just like, oh, they're drinking Michters and they're eating sushi and they're cursing and making this reference. And do I have a head and a heart show right now? I think The Good Fight was the closest thing to it. But for the most part now, I think it's a little bit more like shows are either an intellectual exercise or a comfort food.
And so right now, Succession is comfort? Or is it?
I think it's the closest thing to both. Because I find that the characters, even though they are on the surface very recognizable, are unlike people I've seen before.
It's interesting because even anecdotally, when I've talked to people and TV comes up, what are you watching? What are you talking about on the podcast? I've been shrugging. I've been saying Succession with a question mark at the end of it. And then, you know what people tend to say then? What about Barry? Did you watch Barry? I'm like, yeah, we did. And we loved it. And we talked about it. And it seems like there's been like an ellipsis after Barry. You know, like that's the last show that grabbed people in a certain way. And Killing Eve, of course, as well. And then,
I mean, we shouldn't, like, there's been good stuff this year.
There's been good stuff. There has not been as much good stuff as last year. But I do wonder, and we're going to end on this, and clearly our heads are all over the place this week, and I think it's interesting even to comment on that. The many people are watching and loving Handmaid's Tale. We tapped out. And anecdotally, I don't think we're alone in that. And I'll be curious to see in the weeks ahead, as more and more stuff comes at us, what grabs that third rail and engages people head and heart going forward, because I think Handmaid's Tale did last year.
I'd be curious to know about it in the Facebook group, what people would say are their head shows, heart shows, and head and heart shows.
Let's leave it at that and continue the conversation.
All right, talk to you Thursday.
Great job, Bransky.